Hi again, everybody. Welcome into another edition. This is Cross Functionality, the show connecting coaching, baseball, softball, male, female, hosted by former college baseball and softball players. Thank you for joining us today, episode 53, as we march into the fall of 2023. We've got some great topics here coming up in the coming weeks. So let me bring in my friend, co-host, softball national champion at the University of Alabama, and current day renowned coach, Cassie Reilly-Boccia. Cass, how are you? What's going on?
All is good. We have some real fall weather right now, like highs of 72 in New York, which is, I know, not what most of our country is experiencing right now.
One thing that people complain about when they come to Florida or they move to Florida, no matter if they're living in Miami or they're living in Tampa, wherever they're living in an upscale type spot, for lack of a better term, they always talk about the lack of fall weather. There's something about the fall weather in the Northeast and really across the country. I don't know if when it coincides with college football and the NFL starting, but there's always something with that fall weather that always gets people. Really plays their emotions.
When we're filming, I guess, so college football big weekend starts this weekend. School starts in the Northeast in the next week, so it has a feeling to it.
Yes. And it doesn't help that summer, I got to tell you, the summer months and summer in general, it's really overrated. It's just so damn hot everywhere in the country, everywhere in the world. Summer months, it's just always so hot.
Here, it's gotten hot. If anything, I think like May is starting to turn my favorite because that's like your first real month without cold. It should be at least. We've had some snow in May every now and then, but yeah, that's usually when you're sick of winter and you feel like, I made it. But by July, you're over it.
Summer is fun in June. Summer is fun on July 4th, and then July 5th hits, and you say, "Well, I'm over this. I can't wait for the fall."
Ready for the fall.
Talking today, teachable moments. This is a fun topic. Glad you're with us. Follow us on social media at Jim Tara on Twitter and Instagram, at Coach_CassieRB on Instagram, at Coach CassieRB on Twitter. Teachable moments today, how individuals develop. And I've had, just a side note, the opportunity to talk with many and develop relationships and friendships with coaches. The person I'm talking to right now, the Jake Epsteins of the world, Pat Murphy, Mike Calitri, just to name a few. I've had the opportunity to develop friendships and relationships with those type of people and some really great coaches. And the one thing I've noticed with coaches, not one thing, but there's a variety of things, but if there is an element of coaches that separates them from the rest of the pack, it's the ability to help players understand those teachable moments right at their fingertips. Teachable moments, what are they? How individuals develop, learn new skills, and grow their abilities in real time. And this is important in what is, Cassie, an unstructured environment.
Yes. And you know what? I think if you're a coach or a parent or both, whatever it may be, you're going to say, well, of course, there's teachable moments all throughout. Like, I think what we're trying to do is just one, kind of talk about the formula or the recipe to a teachable moment or a really valuable teachable moment. And then also to recognize that not all moments that you think are teachable as a coach are really the athlete is receiving as a teachable moment. So it's kind of trying to find that window of opportunity for the athlete. And certainly if anyone is a teacher who also coaches, I think they probably understand this better than anyone else because they have had background in recognizing when an athlete is able to receive or the tactics that might be able to be utilized for an athlete to really grab onto a topic and hold on to it for the future and not just for that moment.
So there are three components here we're going to talk about today when it comes to teachable moments: clarifying criteria, seeking alternatives, and gaining commitment. Let's first start with clarifying criteria and what that means as it pertains to teachable moments.
Sure. All that's basically saying, and again, this sounds very school classroom-esque, but the idea is, does the athlete know what they're doing here? Does the athlete know kind of what the curriculum is, what the syllabus is? And that's not to say that they can't learn without that, but especially as they start to get older, it's what's the intent? What's the agenda? And when the athlete is able to become aware, like, listen, primary focus today is X, Y, and Z. We're working on back hip rotation. We're working on making you a little stronger here. Then they're not just passively going through the next hour and a half, whatever it is. They're actually very much so. That's the first step to engaging them in, okay, I know what I'm supposed to get out of this now. And that is crucial, just to make sure we're communicating that to the athlete.
Also, too, when you talk about unstructured environment, just circling back to that for a quick second, and this is why film and video is so important in today's game, baseball and softball. with an unstructured environment, and those were or where the teachable moments come from. Those
Mm.
teachable moments, not only coming from a structured environment with teachable moments, it's not as impactful as, say, an unstructured environment practice from a game, right? So a game is more unstructured. That's where you can really learn, because you're doing something, as we talked about, in real time. You may be doing it right, you may be doing it wrong, but there's always that teachable moment that is there for you.
Absolutely, yeah, and to piggyback off that as well, I think the biggest thing is saying, hey, ladder drills, cone drills,
Hmm.
they're not, yes, the best running backs are going to do them really well. That doesn't mean those drills are making you better at being a running back. What makes you better and what is actually going to learn is going into those game-like scenarios where you have the reaction, not being like, okay, right foot's going to go here, then it's going to go there. That's the athlete is going to learn how to be a robot, not how to actually learn something and take it with them, and then hopefully make it even better. Right? You want to plant the seed and watch it grow in the athlete, not just carbon copy something onto one athlete to the next.
So talking about with the components here, we've discussed clarifying criteria, but what about seeking alternatives? Let's talk about that a little bit when it comes to teachable moments. Seeking alternatives, it seems like a very broad term. So let's break that down into smaller terms and into smaller ways that an athlete can understand how seeking alternatives applies to teachable moments.
Sure. This is essentially you're trying to get the athlete to really think outside the box with what they're learning, right? So many times athletes are on this one track mindset, or they've been ingrained in them. Well, I do this, I roll over. Great. Why do we think this is happening? Is this only happening in a game? Is this happening off the tee? It's just, and I think of this as like not the interrogation, but the question asking type thing. I'm going to really challenge the athlete to, well, I know you've been told this, but does that actually make sense to you? If you actually rolled over every time, why do you only do it in a game? Is it like, do you have a rolling over issue? Do you have a timing issue? Not, I can start to see where I want the athlete to go with it. So I'm kind of providing maybe the guardrails in their thinking abroad, but I really want them to start to think outside the box and not just, verbatim repeat what a coach or a parent or someone else has told them in the past. So it's really trying to stretch that. And it doesn't always have to happen in conversation, because there's going to be plenty of people listening that say, I'm not going to be able to have that intelligent or deep a conversation with 15 kids on a field when we're running a practice and there's only one of me. But I think it'll start to come about like this can look like obtuse drills. This can look like using different pieces of equipment to try to feel a certain thing, to try to get the athlete to maybe understand. So again, the internet loves to critique weird looking drills, but I really do think I'm like, all right, maybe the coach is in this little seeking alternative stage where they're trying to get the athlete to be like, oh, okay, this could, I can look at this from a different angle now.
And you mentioned in there too, though, with coaches who aren't maybe are listening right now won't be able to grasp this with 15 to 20 players, but that's more of a structured environment. The unstructured part, when it comes to teachable moments, that's in the game. And now you're seeing what is a teachable moment and how can we seek these alternatives for this player, maybe in more of a structured type environment.
Sure. Right. It's almost like you have the lab and then you're testing out in real life.
Yeah.
I dabbled one time with coaching in-game environments, and it was I had volunteered helping out a 23 and under team with my dad like 2 years after I graduated. And I started, we're in a game scenario, and all I wanted to do was just stop the game and be like, okay, did we see what just happened here? Because I wanted to break down something that was going on. Obviously, you can't do that. That's not even going to be beneficial. But what I started to do is take little notes on a notepad, to just go over, even if it wasn't right after the game, but just to maybe I was going to call that athlete afterwards and be like, all right, cool. Let's break down how you felt. Like, this is the criteria of why I'm calling you. And now I'm going to challenge you to seek alternatives. And that was the basis of maybe that conversation. So I do think there are so many of those teachable moments, but if an athlete is getting overwhelmed in a game-like environment, or the game is moving too fast for them, whatever it is, and we need to help slow things down for them, those type of breakdowns and feedback are huge.
So and it sounds like from your experience, you learned the lesson of putting stock in what you think was the most teachable moment and not breaking down the smallest thing that may not matter in the long run, and having to decipher through that as a coach.
For sure. And again, when you go back to the clarifying criteria, there's it's very difficult, I think, to go into a game and say, okay, the purpose of this game is to beat this other team or to compete as hard as you can.
Right.
You hope that leads to you, the scoreboard taking care of itself, right? So you want to compete as hard as we can at the plate. We want to get that sweet spot to the ball. We're going to time them up. We're going to have high confidence, go all out on the field. This is the criteria of the game. However, we're critiquing what you did on a pitch, where your arm slot was, how you fielded a ball, how you we're critiquing all these like tiny minutiae that are probably not what is going to be necessarily teachable come game time. Like there's going to be some unstructured like time where we can go back and reflect on that. But I think that's where there's sometimes a disconnect with players where it's like, wait a second, I was out here trying to compete. I wasn't thinking about my swing at the plate. And now you're telling me something was going on in my swing,
Yeah.
I think that's sometimes difficult for athletes to consume.
And maybe for coaches too, right? Because there's so many things that you could point out and that's wrong in somebody's swing. But again, how does that help them in the long run? I've unfortunately had coaches like that who would point out the smallest things that really in the end don't matter. I mean, and to me, I'm taking it from a hitting perspective here. And I'm not the expert, so I don't want people to misinterpret me. I'm sure they haven't, but I don't know. I've had coaches too who have Jake Epstein's one actually, who we would take 5 swings or 10 swings, and then we would break down the most important points of those swings using video and other devices that and equipment that he used and he uses currently to this day. I think that's the best approach to take. I'm kind of getting off tangent here, but when it comes to hitting, especially hitting, look at 10 swings rather than just having instruction after take front toss, for example, after every single pitch, every single hit, whatever, every single swing. I think doing it in 5 to 10 swing intervals and then providing coaching feedback is probably the best way to go. And if that could provide, I think from a hitting perspective, at least in the cage in a structured environment, more of a teachable moment there.
For sure. And you know what, you'll start to notice with certain athletes, and again, I will give most of my examples in that cage environment because that is where I came from, but I like to explain. And then as the athlete starts to hit, I get quieter and quieter and quieter to the point where I might not say something for like 3, 4, 5 swings, maybe, because I'm just watching. And on purpose, I'm trying to see how uncomfortable this athlete is with me not giving feedback. And it is very interesting to see an athlete who's been conditioned to receive feedback after every single thing or try to make an adjustment on every single pitch. How uncomfortable it is, where it's like, okay, she hasn't said anything. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? But that's, again, if they're so uncomfortable with just even 4 or 5 pitches or T swings without feedback, how uncomfortable are they going to be ever working on their own and learning on their own, which is obviously the ultimate place you want to get an athlete to.
Yeah. If the coach's mind is all over the place, then eventually the player is going to pick up on that, and their mind's going to be all over the place, I think, as well, especially when it comes to hitting. It's obviously, as you know, it's a different animal.
Sure. Yeah. And I think if you're an athlete listening to us being like, oh, my coach used to do this every time, most of the time it doesn't come from a bad place. The coach is genuinely trying to be like, I want to help this athlete out. How can I do it? To be honest, like when I first started coaching, that was probably exactly how I coached. I was like, I wanted to pour so much into the athlete. I was definitely overwhelming an athlete. But I think as you learn different things like this, hey, maybe there is so much valuable time in taking a step back. And now, hey, did we just have an opportunity to find other teachable moments kind of snuck in throughout the athlete sessions, let's say, or their gameplay or whatever they're working on.
Yeah. Be sure to, again, subscribe to the podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify on the audio side, and on the visual side, the Softball Strength Academy YouTube page. If you have any questions, please email us, jimbopodcast21@gmail.com. That is jimbopodcast21@gmail.com. All right. Moving on to the third component here, gaining that commitment. Did I have that right? My handwriting's so small that I can't. Yes, gaining commitment. I know I just had a birthday last week and I'm getting older, but I don't need glasses. My handwriting is just really, really small. So what is gaining commitment? How does that pertain to teachable moments?
Yeah. So we have that initial stage, right? So again, they have the criteria. Okay, we know we're focusing on this. Now as a coach, I'm challenging them to think really outside the box, think more broadly about what is going on. And now we have the athlete is going to get to the point where it's like, okay, cool, I'm sold. I believe that me committing to this, whatever it may be, this plan, and it might be that I need you to shut your brain off more and stop thinking. It might be, okay, we're going to focus in on this one component and go from it, whatever it may be. They've officially bought in. And I think once you've like passed that threshold where the athlete is, okay, boom, or the student or whoever you're teaching has bought in, now we can kind of be rest assured, okay, we have laid the foundation for future teachable moments to fall into place. Because without that final piece, it's kind of just been noise at that point, right? Okay, cool, you made me think outside the box, but I haven't really grasp anything I could take for the long haul. I can't now do this on my own. And I'm not really bought in on, they don't have to necessarily be bought in 100% to you. It just, the concepts that you're talking about or the idea that you're talking about is, okay, this has clicked for me, and now they can take it for the long haul.
That's interesting. As a coach, how do you get players to buy into your concepts?
So I think one, it's going to be dependent athlete to athlete, right? So an athlete can't all of a sudden sense that you're trying really hard to really force a buy-in. It's going to happen organically. It's going to be a different timeline for some athletes than others. You might have an athlete that's already bought in. They've heard about you. A friend works with you, and they're almost 80% of the way there. I think too, they have to know that coach is there to serve you. They're trying to genuinely make you better. They don't want to take credit for it. And what you'll start to see is an athlete will slowly but surely start to say, okay, this is my goal. I'm handing this part of this over to trust you with it. And I think too, how an athlete receives feedback. So how an athlete is going to receive criticism, because there's always going to be some type of critiquing or feedback necessary for these growth moments to happen, these teachable moments to happen. Is an athlete going to respond really, really well in a group environment where they can kind of bounce off of each other, or are they not there yet and they need their feedback and criticism given in a more one-to-one setting? And so as you get to know that athlete, you're going to start to get to know, this works best for you, this works best for you, and you go from there. But if an athlete doesn't really sense that you're there for them and you're kind of just there to just say your piece and move on, I don't know how strong that buy-in is going to be. And thus, as a coach, then what are we actually doing? Because they're not actually then helping the person we're trying to help.
Well, it's a perfect segue, because talking about getting to know the athlete, that is a huge proponent in teachable moments and understanding how that athlete receives those certain types of teachable moments that are presented for them.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what, even if anyone's ever played for a team, I know as you start to get into an older part of a team, or maybe a leadership position, a captainship position, that is a huge challenge, because you're looking at your team and it's like, all right, this person needs to be held accountable. And, you know, we used to be in the weight room with other teams at Alabama sometimes, and the baseball guys used to get in their face and yell at each other. And I looked at my team and I'm like, if any one of us did this here, there were some years you'd have tears, because they, like, people, you know, girls would just be like, you know, so not to say that that's obviously a stark contrast. There's plenty of girls that could be yelled at, no problem. And plenty of boys that wouldn't like to be yelled at. So it's just, it really does depend. And so when you provide that feedback, you're kind of just testing the waters a little bit at first. You're testing, hey, I'm going to bring this person into a group environment, and I'm going to just kind of gauge their body language. What do they look like when, you know, they might be nodding their head, but if all of a sudden their shoulders got a little rounded, they try to get a little smaller, they got quieter. That is a clear sign something about feedback in that group environment is an alarm for them, that they just are not responding the best to, and we just make an adjustment from there and test something else out.
And teachable moments, really, it all ties back to that feedback and giving that proper feedback as a coach. How does that feedback and teachable moments, how does that differ for male athletes as compared to female athletes? And again, we're speaking in the context of baseball and softball.
Yeah, you know what? And again, I'm putting a blanket over both genders here, but so you have exceptions, obviously, but typically I need to be way shorter, way more direct, and a lot less talking with a guy. And then girls, they want a little bit of a deeper explanation. They want to know a little bit more about the why, or they want to have a little bit more of that one-to-one setting, where guys, I think, kind of thrive off of sometimes in that group setting. You have really like-minded guys, or guys right around the same competition level. All of a sudden, it's like a very positive ego-based environment where they're learning not just from the coach. Now it's like you've kind of just planted this like learning seed into this group environment, and they're all feeding off of each other, having really positive competitive environments with each other. And the feedback can be, it might look completely different, but it's trying to accomplish obviously the same task then.
Yeah. What do you see as the challenges as we wrap up today's episode 53, Teachable Moments? What do you see as, for coaches anyway, some challenges when it comes to both male and female in baseball and softball with teachable moments? Some players, it just doesn't register, and some players just don't understand it, or as they say in baseball and softball, they don't get it. But how do you try to crack that shell for both male and female when it comes to those teachable moments in an unstructured environment?
I think it's honestly their conditioning kind of coming in before that. So they might be having
same parents. I mean, it has to do with how they're raised. Maybe it's product of their environment, right?
And that's not to say they were raised by bad parents. Like that's not the case. It's like, this is a parent who like obviously has a lot of love and they want to help a ton. But again, if a parent is putting themselves in a coaching environment, they're putting themselves, you can't fulfill both roles 100% at the same time. So you're going to have to challenge yourself and fight with like, okay, well, when I'm being their coach, I'm not going to be their best parent. And when I'm being their parent, I'm not going to be their best coach. And I think some parents have nailed it and have figured out how to do that. But I also think sometimes the athlete is just very confused, at least, as to how to, okay, what's the criteria of this conversation right now or what's the curriculum that I'm going after? Am I getting comforted by a parent, or am I getting critiqued by a coach right now? And when they, most of the time too, I think sometimes parents probably haven't had the coaching background or experience to be able to look at those seeking alternatives, right? So that stage probably gets bypassed, where it's like, all right, listen, saw this online, we're going to give this a try. Boom, boom, boom. Let's go to the garage. Let's try this out. Which is totally, it's fine. It's not bad. It's just start, but you want to, there's going to be a point where that you get there and you're like, okay, let's bring someone else in to help us think outside the box on this here. And then feedback is, I have to imagine that is the hardest thing in the world. My dad coached 20 years. He was a great coach. He studied softball. He tried so hard to be the best, like, neutral coach. And he was my dad. So I didn't, whatever, he could have said something, and then my coach could have said something. And I'm like, oh, did you hear that? And, I think that's just the norm. Like it is very difficult, I think, for kids to accept criticism and feedback from their parents, even if it is you're doing everything right. I just think it's very hard. So again, that conditioning for an athlete coming in for the first time for a session, it's trying to see, okay, where do they lie with what they have experienced before?
Did your dad tell you when he was coaching you, don't call me dad?
Well, okay, so it was a little different because he was
a little different, right? It would be.
I called him Chris anyway, but no, I never had that type of environment. And to be honest, it wasn't even in a team setting. It was, he would research softball and the swing and everything, and had notes this long and a binder so thick, and he had all these great drills from all these great coaches. But I'm like, so I got to go practice with, you know what I mean? I don't know why. It just was like such a block in my head. And I see it with my athletes all the time. And I don't know. It just was one of those things. I couldn't receive it from my dad.
That would be an interesting case study, though, to try to understand why parents who try to coach their kids don't connect as well than the outside voice, right? It's an interesting case study.
Yes.
I don't know it. I don't know why.
I'm sure there's a lot to it, and I'm sure a lot of it makes sense because, you do get, as a parent, you're trying to provide guardrails for your kid for every part of their life, and then maybe the sport, they just need something else. Maybe they're probably gets to a certain age, they don't want to hear the same voice at home that they hear on the field. Right.
It's that voice, almost like that voice of authority that they now become a coach. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting little thing that if anybody wants to write in and talk about, email us, jimbopodcast21@gmail.com. Have you seen some coaches out there? Have you taken examples of coaches who have done the wrong thing when it comes to teachable moments? In other words, when they're trying to tell an athlete or to show an athlete a teachable moment, maybe their approach is wrong. Have you seen that? Have you experienced that in your time as an athlete?
I think it's where it usually fails is in the feedback or the criticism. And again, it's a coach trying to figure out, okay, does this person respond to a harsh, quick hey, like this, or are they responding to like, hey, you need to go a little soft, you know what I mean? And I especially see a disconnect sometimes when you have males coaching females, and it's a little less common, but I certainly felt like I had the most learning to do when I started coaching males, and because that for whatever reason that that instantaneous connection of like, oh, I've been in your shoes before. You don't have that necessarily. You don't have that structure to start off with, so. I have seen that usually be the case where we as coaches miss the most on is trying to nail the feedback, and it just slips away. And now the athlete hasn't probably grasped exactly what we were trying to get them to grasp and held on to it for the long haul.
Yeah. Next week, episode 54, ways to get pre and post game. Speaking of feedback, ways to get pre and post game feedback from your athletes and how coaches can mix in with that as well, giving the proper pre and post game feedback. That is episode 54 next week. Be sure to subscribe to the show on the audio side, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and on the Softball Strength Academy YouTube page. Just hit that like button for previous episodes, or subscribe button, right? Subscribe button, whatever. They're kind of the same thing now. Twitter is, I know Twitter has changed now, the X platform, where now it's not retweet anymore, it's repost. So everything's,
yes.
Yeah. Everything in today's world, all these words, all these adjectives, are starting to come together. So next week, episode 54, ways to get pre and post game feedback from your athletes and how coaches can capitalize on that as well. All right. Do you have anything coming up at Softball Strength Academy?
No, we're still cruising with we're adding to that drill library, not necessarily adding drills, but adding different criteria. So hey, if you're an athlete who's struggling with falling over their front side, if you're an athlete who's struggling with staying back, if you don't want to necessarily go through the entire course of how it teaches you how to read the library, you have like kind of quick table of contents to just access 10 to 15 drills right off the bat. So just constantly adding to it. If anyone is interested in the library, people think it's a yearly subscription. It is a one-time lifetime purchase, and you get all the updates when we add them. So just a great resource, hopefully, for coaches and parents that when they're looking to a little extra brain power to working with their hitters.
All right, very good. And if anybody out there wants to is interested in podcast and multimedia opportunities, reach out to me, jimbopodcast21@gmail.com. Thank you for listening today. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast again, and we will talk to you next week. Take care.